Voices, freedom, COVID-19. The Four Freedoms Expedition started at King Middle School in 1997 and continues on today. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we, the staff at King Middle School, felt that it would be a great time to hear directly from our students at King Middle School about how their views around freedom have changed or been reinforced due to the pandemic. Students will talk about freedom of worship, shown here in both a contemporary and historic view, from Norman Rockwell on the right. Freedom of speech, both contemporary and traditional. Freedom from want, again, a contemporary view and a traditional view. And freedom from fear, both as a contemporary view and as a traditional view. This is the art that started the expedition, and today that expedition has changed, but the voices of our students are still heard.
During the pandemic, some of our freedoms are limited. The freedom I chose to display this is freedom from fear. My race has largely impacted my life during the pandemic. Asian Americans have been the target of many hate crimes since the beginning of February. My parents run a small Asian grocery market in downtown Portland. People have come in yelling racial slurs, knocking over items, and telling us to, quote, go home. Since the schools have closed, my parents have become stricter than any other stores we have seen out of fear. They overcompensate to attempt to ensure our safety, not from the virus, but from other people. My parents continue to work every day despite being in the high-risk category, yet they receive ignorance and hate. It is wrong that some people can go to the beach or hang out with their friends with no negative response, yet I get told to go back to my country when stocking the shelves of my family's own store. Our freedoms have become limited, but people are letting their fear control them, and it is targeting minority groups. Are you a part of the problem?
Freedoms are being limited during the COVID-19 pandemic. The freedom I chose to show being limited during the pandemic is freedom of worship. Here's how it affected me. How has the COVID-19 pandemic changed your view of what freedom of worship means? The COVID-19 pandemic hasn't really changed my view of what freedom of worship means, but I've realized a few things during it. One thing is that there's a lot more religions than I realized, and they all have certain traditions and celebrations that they can't do right now. Also, a lot of people take time to worship with their family and friends, and right now they can't do that, which affects them all in many different ways. How has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted your freedom of worship? The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted my freedom of worship by making it so I wasn't able to go to church with my great-grandmother. I'm not the most religious person, but my great-grandma is. We are both Catholic, and I am baptized into catechism classes for a year. Usually for Easter, I'll go to church with my great-grandmother, and during some of the other weekends, I'll usually go with her. But this year, I was not able to go because I moved. But if the pandemic wasn't happening, I might have been able to travel up and go. I chose to show how this pandemic has limited freedom of worship for many people, including me. Has the pandemic limited your freedom of worship? If so, how?
The freedom I chose to display the restricted freedom during the pandemic is freedom from want. The questions I chose to answer to show that this freedom is limited during the pandemic are: how did the federal government and the local government do when it came to helping people who have lost their jobs? And how much have jobs been affected by the coronavirus outbreak? According to what I have found regarding the first question, the U.S. government has been shockingly slow to give a plan. In addition, according to my research on the second question, there has been a 4.5% reduction in hours throughout the world in the first quarter of 2020. In conclusion, the freedom I chose was to show limited freedom during the pandemic is freedom from want.
My name is Paul Clifford. I'm a teacher at King Middle School, and I'm here to help a friend of mine out, one of my students, with his video. So you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Douglas, and I'm an 8th grader at King Middle School, and my freedom is freedom from fear, because I like to take care of everyone.
So you're living at home, and you wanted to talk about how You want to protect your family. Is there anybody at home that you particularly want to protect that you're a little worried about?
I worry about my grandma because she's really old and she's not doing really good in health, and it will be really sad and actually break my heart if she gets it because it's really bad.
And I know there's some younger folks at your house too, right?
Yeah, I have a little brother. He's 5. He plays around. He we I take him outside for like at least 10 minutes because he likes to run around,
Mm-hmm.
and we usually wash our hands when we come back.
That's smart. What else do you do to protect your family other than wash your hands?
I told my mom when she goes to work to at least wear a mask or gloves, and when she comes home to like use hand sanitizer for a bit and then wash your hands.
Awesome. How about social distancing? You guys been practicing that as well?
Yeah, me and my mom don't usually go out, so we usually stay in the house.
Well, I know that it's been a big change. Have you missed school much?
Yeah, I've been missing school, like teachers, lunch with my friends, everyone. It's really depressing being home.
Well, thanks for talking to me about this, Douglas. I really appreciate it. And I know that you're doing a great job of keeping your family safe, and that's awesome. So we'll be talking to you soon.
All right, thank you.
During the pandemic, many things have become limited. The one I chose to talk about is freedom from fear. Right now, it's hard to be sure about anything, and that's what freedom from fear is about. The pandemic has changed what it means for me. I didn't really understand what the freedom was about originally. I've gotten further with my understanding of it, and overall, I understand its importance. However, it cannot be provided at this moment, and as a result, it's become very hard to feel safe. People are blaming each other for this when what we should do is try to stop the virus. It's hard to feel safe when there's no cure to a disease you could catch tomorrow, and when there are people working against progress to stop it. We need to help everybody right now. It's the only way to feel truly safe. There is no guarantee that all freedoms are going to be present always, but that's okay. The sooner we can fix this, the faster we can feel safe. Freedoms may be limited, but it's only so we can get them back again once we're all safe.
Hi, my name is Mutasim, an 8th grader at King Middle School, and today the question I'm going to be answering is how has COVID-19 impacted my freedom of worship? One way COVID-19 impacted my freedom of worship is by putting many limits on where I can worship. For example, since I'm a Muslim, I celebrate Ramadan and Eid with family and friends. But since we're in a pandemic, we are not allowed to meet and celebrate together. Another way COVID-19 impacted my freedom of worship is by not giving me the freedom to worship with other people. In conclusion, COVID-19 impacted my freedom of worship by putting limits on where I can worship, who I can worship with, and who I can gather with. In what way did COVID-19 impact your freedom of worship?
Does COVID-19 scare you? Because it definitely scares me, which is why I chose freedom from fear. The question I'll be answering are, how do you feel the federal and local government could do a better job of making people feel safe during the pandemic, and how are immigrants impacted by the virus? First of all, I feel as though the government could do a much better job to make sure people feel safe. I also believe in return this would help to flatten the curve. I believe if the government focused on explaining to the public how important social distancing is above much else, and how in fact you are much safer by doing so, the people would be more likely to listen, not only keeping themselves safe, but helping to keep others safe too. Secondly, even in this extreme health crisis, wars in many places continue to create immigrants. However, traveling is often unsafe for these people. Many people believe every person arriving from different countries has the coronavirus, which is not always true. It's true that every person should be avoided during this time, but some people believe there are other ways to stay safe. Many people are being assaulted due to the belief they might have the virus. In conclusion, many people feel they're losing from freedom from fear at this time, which is why I chose to talk about it.
Hi, I'm Zola, and the freedom I chose to speak about is freedom of fear. The first question I wanted to address is, what do you need to know in order to feel safe? I believe the answer to this is that everyone should have access to all of the information there is on COVID-19. To prevent people from worrying, everyone should be educated that they can stay safe if they are cautious about preventing the spread of this pandemic. This will cause less people to be overcome by fear. The second question I will talk about goes hand in hand with the last one, and it is, how do you feel the federal and local government could do a better job of making people feel safe during this pandemic? My answer to this is that
While the government is spreading true but scary facts about COVID-19, they should also focus on spreading helpful information that will make everyone feel safer. They should list directions and precautions people can take, such as social distancing and wearing a mask in public. I know that personally, since I have been informed on how to stay safe, I am no longer quite as afraid of my family's safety from COVID-19. This is how freedom of fear is being affected during the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. Think about what you can do to help reduce the spread of COVID-19 today.
Hello, my name is Enos. The freedom I chose to show limited freedom during the pandemic is freedom of fear. The question I would like to answer are, how has COVID-19 pandemic impact immigration, and what do you need to know in order to feel safe? COVID-19 pandemic has impacted immigration in a huge way. There are more than 33,000 undocumented people in detention centers waiting for their deportation hearing. But as they wait, the threat and spread of the new coronavirus grows. To add on, what I need to know in order to feel safe is a sense of what's going on during the pandemic, to know more about how I and everyone can cooperate to prevent the spread of COVID-19. The pandemic impacts the right of freedom of fear. The pandemic has impacted many different situations in many different ways, such as in the immigration process and preventing the spread of COVID-19. What are some changes we can make so we no longer need to limit our freedom while also preventing the spread of COVID-19?
The freedom I chose to talk about is freedom from fear. In order to feel safe and stay safe, you should be cautious when you go anywhere that involves people around you, like a grocery store. You should wear gloves if you have any, and a mask. For example, if people start wearing gloves, the virus wouldn't spread to our hands and then spread to our mouths if we touch them. The federal government and the local government could do a better job with lifting bans. They should give it more time. Cases should drop significantly before they start opening things. The government should not worry much about the economy. They should care more about people's health. For example, when quarantine started, it started to slow down a little. Then things started to open up, and more cases were reported. According to the CDC, washing your hands with soap and water is more efficient than hand sanitizer. In conclusion, people and the government should do a better job in this pandemic, for our own safety and for others. Do you think this is going to end soon if we don't start social distancing?
Hi, I'm Ms. Hatch from Matinicus at King Middle School, and I'm here with a student of mine to talk about the 4 freedoms that has been affected by this pandemic.
Hi, my name is Marbella, and I like to share my thoughts about freedoms during this pandemic. How has COVID-19 pandemic changed your life? Freedom from fear has affected me the most during this pandemic. I've had to stay home and quarantine during this time. I have not been able to see friends, family, or travel. I was going to go to Ecuador to visit my dad for vacation, and I am unable to travel to see him due to this COVID-19. I was also going to Pennsylvania. I was also going to go to Pennsylvania to see my siblings, but it is not safe for us to travel. In order to feel safe, when I go outside, I have to wear a mask, social distance, and wash my hands a lot. The local government has been opening up stores. The stores have a limit of people entering. Traveling is still a challenge. Traveling has opened up, but it is a personal choice to travel. My mom wants to wait until it's safer for us. In conclusion, freedom from fear has affected all of us in different ways during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thanks for sharing, Marbella.
The coronavirus lockdown has provoked the largest single-year drop in carbon emissions ever recorded. With the economy being shut down and the freedom from want limited, the air quality and carbon emissions have changed throughout the world. During the pandemic, everyone is staying home and many businesses have closed, and no one is traveling. This virus has helped reduce pollution because people and tourists aren't going out and doing things such as littering. It has also helped reduce the amount of pollution going in the air, and most factories have had to shut down and cars aren't being used, so they aren't burning gas. A study of global carbon emissions found out that the daily emissions decreased 17% between January and early April. compared to the average levels in 2019 and could decrease anywhere between 4.4% to 8% by the year's end. That figure would mark the biggest annual drop in carbon emissions since World War II. Air quality around the world is getting better because of the COVID-19 lockdown.
Did you know llamas could be the cure to coronavirus? That's right, the antibodies in llamas could be the solution to the COVID-19 pandemic. I chose to talk about freedom of fear. I never thought that leaving my house could be as scary as it is now. How has the COVID-19 pandemic changed my view on what it means to be free from fear? COVID-19 has changed my point of view from freedom of fear because you cannot go outside of your house without wearing a mask and staying 6 feet from all other people. This makes me scared of what will come in the future. If people took proper precautions, we would not still have to live in the fear of losing a friend or family member. People who are still going out while not wearing masks or even hanging out with their friends are the reason why we still have to live in this constant fear of the virus. In conclusion, I want to leave my house. I want to hang out with my friends, but I can't. This is real and it's happening now, so do something about it. It doesn't matter if that means staying home and not hanging out with your friends. The longer you wait, the longer the fear of losing the most important people in your life will stay.
The coronavirus is affecting people living in poverty the hardest. The freedom I chose to talk about is freedom from what? The questions I will be answering are, how is the coronavirus affecting people living in poverty, and what are some ways we can help them? The coronavirus has been affecting them because they don't have somewhere to stay or an option during this pandemic. They can't follow the rules of social distancing or staying home. They might not know the rules during this pandemic because they don't have a television, a phone, or a radio. They also don't have a home to stay home to. Some ways we could help people are handing out masks to them, also mini mags with hand sanitizer, gloves, masks, and much more. Those questions show why I chose to talk about freedom from what.
When disaster strikes, people's true selves come out. Mass consumerism and greed all over. Mass consumption of things that are simply not needed en masse. This is all driven by fear. As you can guess, I chose freedom from fear. This pandemic has taken away our good judgment, and common sense is clouded because of the paranoia and fear-mongering this virus has created. For example, domestic assault is on the rise, with the vast majority of victims being children. There has also been large increase in domestic violence in poor or minority populations. In China alone, this past February, they received 3 times more domestic assault calls than at the same time last year. Local governments and healthcare systems have also fallen short, keeping us feeling safe during this crisis. Courts and services are doing a poor job explaining the victims' rights during stay-at-home orders. The healthcare system is limited access emergency services due to the amount of illness caused by the coronavirus and individuals struggling to get extensions and protection orders from their abusers during this time. Mental health issues are also a major concern now more than ever. A recent study has shown that people are 8 times more likely to screen positive for mental health issues such as depression than they were a year ago. Surprisingly, young adults experience 10 times more distress than in older generations, and calls mental health lines have surged worldwide. As you can see, this chaos we have been thrown into has not only affected people's physical state, but also the state of their households and emotional health. I have been talking to a friend about how scared everyone is during this time with no end in sight. As a global community, we can agree on one thing. Everyone will be affected by this pandemic in some way. No matter how rich, rural, or how many resources you have, everyone is still fearful of the pandemic.
Hi, so the freedom that is being limited during the pandemic that I chose to talk about is freedom of speech. The questions that I will be discussing are, how does the coronavirus change your feelings around freedom of speech when it comes to the spreading of important information, and what evidence of freedom of speech have you been seeing being executed recently? For the first question, I've found that coronavirus has limited the amount of important information being spread. For example, in late May or April, I remember Trump saying on the news how Virginia only had 12 cases of COVID-19, and that they were keeping the virus well under control. Not even a week later, when a story came out about a couple who thought they had the virus, but the hospitals would not allow them to be tested. The man got very sick, and when he finally got tested, it took over a week and a half to get the test back because the hospital quote-unquote misplaced it. This couple is not the only ones to have this happen to them. Many people cannot get tested, and the government is using the small number of cases recorded as an excuse to say that the state is doing well. According to The Atlantic, Virginia senior officials are blending the results of two different types of coronavirus tests in order to report a more favorable result to the public. This shows that people of a higher power are not sharing the full truth, and it is hard for the small voices to be heard when they are coming in conflict with a voice as big as the president. Moving on to the second question. People are putting their voices on all sides of the coronavirus. Many people are listening to the stay-at-home order and social distance order. However, there have been anti-quarantine protests all over the United States. According to Wired, anti-quarantine protests are an American mess. Last week, protesters gathered in cities across the United States normally to insist that governments lift the social distancing guidelines put in place to curb the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Protesters were mostly white Republicans and held signs that weren't just about COVID. Signs talked about gun rights, immigration, abortion, and there was the occasional Confederate flag. These people are going against what doctors and scientists have said. There have also been many videos made by people who agree with scientists and doctors about why we need to social distance and stay in quarantine. As you can see by what I just told you, freedom of speech is being limited during this pandemic. We need to trust the facts and not the myths. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Crystal Mano. I'm in 8th grade. I study at King Middle School. And the freedom I'm going to talk about right now is the freedom from fear, which a lot of people in the world are experiencing it. And that's really a harsh time for all of us, because not only people that have worse conditions than us are having this fear, but us too, as even though we have more access to information, and we have more access to information, more conditions to know when to do something or why to do it. We still have a fear because we worry about our grandpas and our children, the one more susceptible for to get the disease, and most of us are in fear.
A freedom that is being challenged during the COVID-19 pandemic is freedom from want. More than 30 million Americans have filed for unemployment. However, the government is giving more financial compensation to corporate America rather than most working-class people. The most recent stimulus check didn't include rental assistance or expand on food stamps, which would help those in need. In many communities, people of color are more likely to contract COVID-19. According to a Washington Post study, African Americans make up about 70% of coronavirus deaths in Chicago and Louisiana, while being 32% of the population in these areas. Studies show that when receiving health care, African Americans do not get the same quality treatment as white people. Robert Sampson, a Harvard professor of social sciences, says, "The coronavirus is really exposing class and race-based vulnerabilities, particularly in the form of what I think of as toxic inequality, especially the clustering of COVID-19 cases by community." So, when it comes to the freedom from want, is everyone really treated equally during the pandemic?
I chose freedom from want to show limited freedom during the pandemic. During the pandemic, how has your views around the have and have-nots, the rich and poor in the United States, changed? The pandemic has changed my views of the rich and poor majorly. In this hard time, a lot of people who have the money to buy masks and other protective equipment for others aren't using it for good, while the very poor people who can't afford to protect themselves aren't able to. How has the pandemic changed your view on what freedom from want means? Before the pandemic, freedom from want meant having basic needs to live a nice life. During the pandemic, a lot of things are added onto that. Freedom from want should include giving medical supplies and protective supplies to people who aren't able to get them themselves. When there are people out there with millions of dollars to spare, it wouldn't affect them horribly to buy masks for the less fortunate. My view on freedom from want has changed a lot since the start of the pandemic. Now, people's basic needs include a lot more than before.
Hi, the freedom I chose to show limited freedom during the pandemic is freedom from fear. My understanding of fear and freedom from fear has changed since the pandemic started. At first, I thought fear included violence, but now I believe that fear is all about not understanding something and having no control over it. The COVID-19 pandemic changed my view on what fear is. We all have fear of something, and we also fear what we don't understand or have no control over it. I didn't think coronavirus was going to come this far. Over millions have died through this virus in this world. People are afraid to lose their relatives or get affected by it. We're all afraid that the fact that we don't have any control over this virus is my biggest fear. We can't do anything except being apart from each other, reduce the risks of catching coronavirus. My view on freedom from fear has changed over the pandemic. We're all afraid, but we'll all also get through this. We should keep ourselves healthy and well. The last question is, what can we do to clear out our fear thoughts of coronavirus?
The freedom that I chose and wanted to explain how it has changed during the pandemic is the freedom from fear. This pandemic has changed my view on what it means to be free from fear. This is because to be free from fear now means that one is protected against COVID-19 and is not fearful of getting the disease. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was worried about getting COVID-19. However, because we are socially distancing and wearing masks, I am no longer as fearful as I once was. For me to feel safe, I need to understand how the virus is spread and fought off. I also need to know the risks and how to be safe. If we all understand the risks and protect ourselves, we can begin to not be fearful of the disease. I believe that the freedom from fear has changed in a monumental way because of the COVID-19 pandemic. How has the freedom from fear changed for you?
Freedom that I'm going to be choosing is freedom from war. My view of freedom from one around the haves and have-nots has been enforced during the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, in Guatemala, Central America, 59.3% of the population lives below the poverty line, and people worry that they aren't going to have a lot of resources to pass the COVID-19 impact. For instance, 8 groups fear that Guatemala, along one of Latin America's most unequal countries, will be hit hard by the effects of the coronavirus, and the deaths of the people are going to decrease the population, since Guatemala is already suffering extreme poverty, violence, and years of climate change. Secondly, I think that Portland, Maine has really helped many people who have been losing their jobs due to the COVID-19 outbreak. For example, the coronavirus outbreak has led to nearly 60,000 Mainers to file for the unemployment in the past 3 weeks, nearly double the monthly total from last year. For example, some families don't have a job and they can't provide a lot of resources to their families, so thankfully organizations are helping the people that have lost their jobs. To summarize, my belief around freedom for one during the pandemic has been enforced, since not everybody has enough resources to stay safe during the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, people might not have food or anything. On the other hand, scientists are trying to flatten the curve, meaning that scientists are trying to reduce the amount of people who get infected by the coronavirus each month. So it's best people could just stay safe.
The freedom that I'm going to talk about is freedom from fear. The essential question I picked was, how do you feel the federal and local government could do a better job of making people feel safe during the pandemic? First, some people are selling fake cures for the coronavirus, and people who are afraid are wasting their money on something that actually doesn't work. What can our government do so that people don't waste their money on cures that don't work? Also, immigrants are coming to the U.S., but they're being held captive in processing centers, and there's no place to move around or social distance. They're afraid because anybody could have the virus, and they can't stay apart. I've been afraid to go to the stores. I've only been to the store a couple of times since this whole coronavirus thing has started. And you don't know if people in the store have the coronavirus. And what if you touch something that they've already touched? The coronavirus pandemic has taken a lot of people's freedom from fear away. I would like the government to do a better job and make people feel less afraid.
Coronavirus is a deadly virus that has spread to most of the world in a short amount of time. I chose freedom from fear as my freedom to show limitations that have been put in place during the pandemic. Freedom from fear is an example of a freedom that has been taken away. The coronavirus pandemic has changed my view on the freedom from fear, as my family has been very fearful about coronavirus, as there is no cure. The coronavirus death toll is increasingly high as of May 22, 2020. There have been 333,000 deaths worldwide and 95,087 deaths in the United States alone. There are precautions people must take as to not spread the virus or contract it. When going outside, my dad now has to wear a mask for protection against COVID-19. Whenever we have to get groceries, we sanitize them as much as possible to not get COVID-19. As I have stated, the coronavirus pandemic has taken away the freedom from fear.
During this pandemic, not everyone can get the healthcare that they want. The freedom from want has been compromised due to COVID-19 pandemic is freedom of want. One reason I selected freedom from want is COVID-19 has changed my view on what freedom from want means by us not being able to do what we want. For example, we can't see our friends. My friends are important to me and make me happy to hang out together, laugh, or just shoot some hoops. My views changed around our healthcare systems in the United States. There are a lot of people going into hospitals, and some people can't even get the help that they need. The healthcare workers have been putting themselves at risk, have been working hard to help others. Are we protecting healthcare workers? Is the personal protective equipment being replaced enough to be protective? In conclusion, these are the reasons I think freedom from want goes the most with COVID-19. People want safe and healthy environment.
I've chosen freedom of speech to showcase on how it's been limited during this pandemic. COVID-19 has left many people with loads of extra time in their hands, and some people have spent that time voicing opinions and stating facts about this fast-spreading disease. Many articles have been released, including an article released by multiple websites, including CNN, about Dr. Li Wenlong being silenced after trying to warn the people about this disease. A statement from the article says, on January 3rd, Li was called to a local police station and reprimanded for spreading rumors online and severely disrupting social order over the message he sent in the chat group. The doctor was just trying to warn his friends. His freedom of speech was quickly taken away from him, which makes me think what would happen if myself or someone else I knew speaks up. My family has debated our thoughts and opinions on this pandemic, but I have a feeling if we were to do this with anyone else, we could and would be silenced. As you can see, freedom of speech has been limited. Can you think of a time it's changed for you?
What could our government have done or do now to better prevent the spread of the pandemic? The freedom that I chose to show restricted during this pandemic is freedom from fear. How do I think the federal and local government could do a better job making everyone feel safe? First, in order to accurately keep track of the pandemic's movements, we need to be doing around 30 million tests per week, but we're only currently doing 1 million. Along with that, Larry Hagan states that the president said that the governors are on their own and they should really focus on getting their own tests. The top thing that I believe the government could do is to provide more testing kits and to do a better job testing. What do I need to know to feel safe? In order for me to feel safe, I'd want to know a few things. First, the best way to prevent the spread of the infection. Secondly, I'd want to know what is happening elsewhere in the world. What people are doing to prevent or to fight the pandemic. Third and final, I'd want access to everything I would need to stay healthy and safe. For example, water, food, and a house. A quick side fact is that oil prices have been in free fall since the onset of coronavirus crisis, as supply extensively suppresses demand. In conclusion, those are the reasons, facts, and statements about the freedom from fear, and more closely, the coronavirus.
The president of Brazil said, "We are sorry for all the dead, but that's everyone's destiny." He said this during the pandemic. Horrible planning, just like the United States government dealing with the pandemic right now. The freedom I chose is the freedom of fear. This is how I feel about how the federal and local government could do a better job of making people safe during the pandemic. Reason 1. COVID has one of the highest death rates due to the government's ability in not enforcing COVID policies. They have 109,000 deaths in total compared to China, with them being at 4,000 deaths. Reason 2. The government has failed to provide money to smaller companies and those who are in need, but instead brought it to assist bigger companies. Lastly, if you look at the charts for the deaths in both the US and China, you can see how people who are tested positive are then put into quarantine compared to the US, where people are now opening up places. In conclusion, the fact that the US has one of the highest death rates and the government not assisted those from smaller companies just proves how they have failed those who live here.
Hi,
So, did you know that freedom from what has been taken away severely during this pandemic? Yes, you're probably realizing this now. The freedom that I chose to show freedom has been limited during this pandemic is freedom from what? The questions I chose to answer are: how has the COVID-19 pandemic changed your view on what freedom from what means? And how have your views around our healthcare system in the United States changed since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic? This COVID-19 pandemic has changed my view on what freedom from want means extremely. This pandemic has actually made me realize that freedom from want was a huge problem back in the day and is coming along with this pandemic. The want factor has been taken away severely as people have to follow the rules by their government to stay safe, but with doing that, many freedoms such as freedom from want have been taken away without people realizing it. The coronavirus has caused many restrictions on freedom from want and assembly to happen. Countries have been going far beyond this as they are restricting people's state of being free. My views around the healthcare system in the United States have changed very much since this pandemic has hit. The healthcare systems are now very overwhelmed with people trying to get tests and people who are sick. I never really pointed out our healthcare workers and what they do for us until this pandemic. They have saved many lives and are working their hardest, as I hear from the news and the people around me. We should all try our hardest to stay safe and not get sick so the healthcare systems don't have to deal with more people, as they have already had to deal with enough. So overall, freedom from want is a great freedom to think about during this pandemic, as many things around freedom from want have been limited. How has your freedom from want been limited? Think about that. Thank you.
The freedom I chose to show limited freedom during the pandemic is freedom from want. The question I'm going to be answering is, how have your views changed around our healthcare system in the United States? The U.S. is the only developed nation without universal health care. Coronavirus patients in the U.S. can have medical bills upwards of thousands of dollars, while people in other countries can get treatment for free. Even people in the U.S. without health insurance may hesitate to get treatment because of deductibles and out-of-pocket costs. Also, it is shown that a large majority of people in the U.S. who are dying from coronavirus are from underprivileged groups who may not have access to the health care they need. I think the amount Americans have to pay for health care is crazy, especially during a pandemic. Personally, I've seen how expensive even the simplest healthcare treatments can get. Therefore, I believe that this pandemic should inspire America to work toward affordable or even free healthcare for everyone.
Did you know that most Muslims around the world won't be able to celebrate Eid due to the effect of the coronavirus pandemic? The freedom I chose is freedom of worship. The freedom I chose to show limited freedom during the pandemic is freedom from worship. How has the COVID-19 pandemic changed your view on what freedom of worship means, and how has COVID-19 impacted your freedom of worship? The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted my view of freedom of worship and its true meaning since the pandemic. Since the pandemic, we haven't been able to visit our religious places such as synagogues, churches, and mosques. This pandemic has taught me and millions how precious religion is to us and how it's part of our everyday lives. We are lucky to be in a society that lets us communicate and contact religious leaders and lets people practice their religions from home during this pandemic. COVID-19 has affected my freedom of worship by not being able to celebrate Eid with my family or friends for Eid, or not being able to speak with our local mosque. Eid is a religious holiday celebrated by Muslims all around the world. This pandemic saddens our celebration for Ramadan. The freedom I chose to show that's impacted during this pandemic is freedom from worship. How has this pandemic changed your and impacted your daily life?
Hi, my name is Blaze. I'm a student at King Middle School. The freedom I have selected to show limited freedom during the COVID-19 pandemic is freedom from fear. The two topics I've chosen to speak about is how do I feel the federal and local government is handling the pandemic, and what do I need to know in order to feel safe. What I need to know in order to feel safe is that people in Maine can go back to work, seeing that more than 15,000 people have applied for unemployment benefits, and many more do not have access to the benefits. I feel that the federal and local government should do a better job of making people feel safe during the COVID-19 pandemic by supplying states with funding for state hospitals and testing. So this So the freedom of fear is the freedom I've chosen to speak about.
The freedom I chose to show limited freedom during the pandemic is freedom from fear. The first question I'll answer is, how has the COVID-19 pandemic changed your view on what it means to be free from fear? The COVID-19 pandemic has changed my view on what it means to be free from fear. Before I knew about corona, I honestly didn't worry too much about getting sick or catching diseases until corona was beginning to be a bigger thing. I was getting a little bit concerned, just as everyone else. But I think it's just because the fact that we can't control the disease is what makes it scary. And I mean, yes, you can social distance and wash your hands and wear a mask and gloves as you should. But even if you do all those things, that can very well prevent you from getting corona. I still feel that there's not a 100% guarantee that you won't get corona. And even if you do all those things, nothing is going to change if we don't all do those things. And I also noticed that we rely on hope a lot, hoping that the people who are sick are staying home and the people around us in like stores are also social distancing and wearing masks and washing their hands as well. The next question I'll be answering is, what do you need to know in order to feel safe? In order to feel safe, I would need to know how everyone else is doing. Like if everyone else is also social distancing, washing their hands, wearing masks, and more. And maybe if someone made some kind of survey to see, out of the people who took the survey, how many people are doing these things and protecting themselves and the people around them. Freedom from fear is how I showed limited freedom during this pandemic. Your actions now affect the future, so please be aware of how you handle things during this pandemic.
Philippus, and the freedom that I chose is free speech. The coronavirus has changed my feelings about the spreading of important information by showing me that not everyone is willing to listen to each other. This pandemic likely could have been prevented had there been more communication and less ignorance. It shows that free speech is better left used than unused, only if the person using it knows what they're talking about. Any speech on social media speaks great volumes, so it can spread as much important information as it can misinformation. I know a doctor called Dr. Hal Cohen. He puts a lot of time and effort searching for true facts about health and safety that are essential during the pandemic. He does his best to slow the spread of both the coronavirus and misinformation. Free speech helped him solve a problem caused by free speech. In conclusion, free speech is especially important during this pandemic to stay informed and safe. Free speech has the possibility to bring us both lies and truths, so people affected by this pandemic, we must separate the important information from the misinformation for the sake of our safety and the safety of others.